Welcome to my workshop on unit construction using Understanding by Design. A caveat before I begin. I claim no ownership over the ideas and concepts relating to Understanding by Design or Enduring Understandings. They are all solely owned by Wiggins and McTighe. What this workshop is really my own sharing on how this has impacted me. Understanding by Design has impacted my pedagogical practices and curriculum planning beliefs. So I hope that at the end of this workshop, you'll be able to have a better idea on how to be more effective and impactful with your pedagogical and curriculum planning. Now, Wiggins and McTighe say that in order for great units to happen, the designer must unpack standards and identify key understandings. Now, there are two phrases that I want us to focus on in this sentence, in this saying: unpacking standards and identifying key understandings. Now, like it or not, whether we are teaching our students and preparing them for a national exam or an internal exam, or even for our own personal goals and aspirations, there are certain standards and there are certain aims and objectives which we want to meet. And we need to be very clear, especially as curriculum writers, we need to be very clear about what those standards are, so that we can communicate those standards to the teachers and the other fellow educators that are sharing the levels or the subject with us. And the next thing I want us to note is the notion of a key understanding or key idea. Now, this stems from the idea that students retain information in a 40-40-40 paradigm. There's some information that students retain for 40 minutes or 40 days, and there's some information that they retain for 40 weeks, and there's some information that they retain for 40 years. And essentially what we are trying to do is to move the information that they are retaining for 40 minutes and 40 days, the short 40, to the long 40. And how we do that is through the use of key or enduring understandings. Now, this may be a little bit much to take. Alright, so in a little bit later, I will lead us through a little exercise to hopefully show you what I mean. So what I hope to cover in today's session will be to look at the thinking behind unit construction, the mechanics of unit construction, and to take you through a little exercise on unit construction. Okay, so let's start with the thinking behind unit construction. Now, I want us all to spend a little bit of time thinking about an incident from your childhood. Think about one incident in your childhood that you still remember, that is meaningful to you at this point. Alright, got that? Okay, now let's think about this. Why do you still remember it? What made you remember that incident? Now, for some of us, those incidents may be 10 years, 20 years, 30 years ago, right? We realize that whatever memory that we have, if we look at the 40-40-40 paradigm, it resides in the long 40, not in the short 40. So whatever it is that we remembered, we managed to retain it in the long 40 paradigm. So what was so special about it that made us remember that particular incident for 40 years? What did that experience mean to you? Has it shaped the way you do things? Has it shaped the way you relate to people? Now, if we be honest with ourselves about this, you realize that whatever it is that we experienced in our childhood shapes the way we see things, has shaped the way we relate to people, our belief systems. So, one thing I want us to realize is that if we want to create curriculum that is impactful and meaningful to students, it must allow students to retain the information and the concepts for 40 years. But at the same time, because we are doing this, we carry the massive responsibility of shaping the way they do things, their belief systems, and the way they relate to people. So curriculum planning is important. How we plan, what we tell our students is important, will impact them in the future. So we need to understanding, essentially. How is understanding impactful? Being impactful in understanding. Wiggins and McTighe put forth 6 facets of understanding. This essentially is the 6 processes or the 6 aspects of understanding that creates understanding. Yeah, this explanation, interpretation, application, perspective, empathy, and self-knowledge. Now, I'll go through this rather briefly, but there are tons of information. Wiggins and McTighe is very easily accessible, so please go and read up more if you feel the need to. Read up more on Wiggins and McTighe and Understanding by Design. Okay, but I'll just endeavor to share with you my very limited understanding of these 6 facets. Now, we begin with our information that we want them to retain. This has to be a key understanding. If we go back to the exercise that you did, you realize that there was a key lesson. There was a lesson that you were taught by that particular incident during your childhood. There was a lesson. It was an understanding. It shaped the way you view the world. So it made you understand, look at certain things in a certain way. So there was a key understanding. So when we begin to write curriculum, we should always start with this key understanding. What is it that is so important that we want our children to know? And then the next step would be to use explanations. How do we lead them there? All right? And how we lead them there is through the use of essential questions. An essential question, essentially, pardon the pun, is a question that brings the student from where they are, perhaps with a half knowledge, perhaps with no knowledge, to the understanding or to the realization of the truth that we want them to realize. So we use essential understandings. This can take the form of tests and quizzes and performance tasks. It can take a myriad of forms and activities, and I'll speak on activities a little bit later on. But the essential task is the same. It leads the students through a process of questioning. It leads the students to discovering the truth which we want them to discover. And after we have led them there, after we have shown them, alright, this is where we want you to be, it would be good if we can give them an opportunity to re-express what they have gleaned. Right? It could be in the form of creating an analogy, critiquing material, perhaps even creating something and then doing a peer critique of it. Right? Just so that they get an opportunity to reinforce their understandings, settle in, all right, and let those information settle into their understanding, construct meaning. After that, what we want them to do is to demonstrate that they have received the desired understanding. So the next step then would be to give them a task with which they can demonstrate, all right? They can produce something which shows that they have understood the right thing. So at this point, you realize how we're doing this, right? We start with an end in mind. We have a question. We lead them to that end. We allow them to spend some time there, settle in, right? Re-express, reinforce, and then to check, we give them a task to demonstrate that they understood, or they have achieved that understanding. And then what we want to do, right? Usually as educators, we kind of stop there. As long as they reflect that they have, or indicate that they have received what we want them to receive, we stop there, right? But what I would like to challenge us to do is to go 2 steps further, right? Firstly, to have them challenge their own beliefs. Now, no better way for you to reinforce your own belief systems than if you were to come to its defense. Yeah, so have them put together, right, put them together with differing views and all perspectives and so on, and have them challenge each other. All right, test and see if they really believe that that is the truth which they are supposed to retain. Yeah, so that is where using different perspectives and empathy come in. And then finally, have them build into their system, all right, a process of self-evaluation and self-assessment, all right, to know where they are and where they can go from this, all right. So learning therefore becomes an internalized process. Okay, so a very quick recap, all right, of the 6 steps. First, we start with an end in mind. What is so important that we want them to learn, all right, and we bring them there through questioning. Okay, and then we allow them to settle in that space for a little while, all right, through re-expression, make sure they get it, and then we give them a task with which they can demonstrate this. Okay, and then after that, once they have shown that they have grasped the understanding, we make them challenge that understanding, okay, through a debate, through conversations, through discussing opposing views, opposing perspectives, all right, and then we lead them to a process of self-assessment and therefore self-knowledge, right, to know where they came from and how do they progress from here. All right, so this is broadly the 6 steps to achieving deep understanding. So at this juncture, I want us to consider your experience in the past 12.5 minutes. How much of enduring understandings were you told explicitly? But how much were you led to understand? How much of a definition did I give you? And how much have you actually learned about the importance of enduring understandings through the activities, through the leading of the questioning? Yeah? And how much would you have retained if this lesson or this workshop thus far was really nothing more than a definition session, right? Would you have understood it? Yeah. So, by answering these questions, I hope you realize, right, just how more impactful essential questions and the leading process, right, the process of leading students to an understanding. I hope you will realize how impactful, how more impactful that really is, right, than a system of delivery, right, deliberate delivery of content. Okay, so now we've gotten the idea of the way. Let's look at the mechanics. How do we construct a unit using this kind of idea? So we first start with enduring understandings. Whatever we teach, there must be a reason why they should learn this topic. What is the reason that the students should spend time or giving you the attention to learn this topic? Why? Why should they learn this? What does it mean to them? After establishing that, then we establish the path. What questions can we use to lead them to that particular understanding? Right? It has to be purposeful, it has to match, right? And it has to be broad enough, yet interesting enough, right, to be able to capture the student's attention. So after the inquiry process, now comes the checking. All right, if we go back to the 6 facets of understanding, you realize this would be demonstration. All right? What measurable evidence do we want them to show? What task do we want to give them? All right? How do we know that they have understood? All right? And together with this, then comes the task. What sort of task, what sort of activity do we want them to do, to perform, so that they are able to demonstrate that they have gleaned that understanding? You know, does the task match the end? And how are we going to then couch the task? What activity are we going to incorporate into our lessons that allow us to have the task which allows them to demonstrate the skills? Yeah, you start to see the process right now. Now, at this juncture, I want us to realize just where on the planning hierarchy activities are. A lot of teachers I've coached and counseled always start with activities first. All right, whenever you ask a teacher to plan a lesson, all right, they always think about the activity first. So, for example, a teacher came to me that day and said that he wanted to do a lesson on natural vegetation. So I said, how are you going to plan it? So the teacher started off with, I want to use the think, pair, share. All right, so we start with the lesson activity. Now, I hope that through this, thus far, this last 16 minutes, you realize that there's a lot of pre-planning to be done, even before you reach the lesson activity stage. The lesson activity is a tool for you to forward the goals with which you are trying to achieve. Yeah? So, lesson activities really come at the end. We need to first establish what we want to achieve out of the lesson before we think about what activities we want to use in the lesson. Alright? So that really is a paradigm shift that I hope all of us can make. So, let's look at an example. Okay? Now, I'm a geography teacher, and but I'm not going to use an example from geography. That is because a lot of language teachers claim that understanding by design, or enduring understandings, does not lend itself to the use in languages. Right? So what I want to try and do is to actually prove that that is not true. Right? That is not true. Instead, I'm going to use an English language example. All right? Just to show you that enduring understandings is really universally, can be universally applied. Okay, and I hope that those of you who are not language teachers who are watching this video, who are attending this workshop, will be able to cross-apply them to your own areas. Okay, so let's start with an English language lesson. Let's assume that this lesson is for Secondary 1 students, alright, or Grade 7 students. Now, it is important for us to first and foremost be very aware of our target audience. Now, I know this is cliche, I know this has been mentioned to death, but knowing where they come from, the pitching, the level, alright, and even sometimes the socioeconomic status, has got tremendous amount of bearing on the success of our lessons. Has got a tremendous amount of bearing on what understandings we want them to have. Alright? So pay attention to the level. Now let's take the topic of adverbs. Alright? I try and pick a very obscure lesson on adverbs. Okay. Usually because it's one of the least of the parts of speech. Alright, and let's say we have a 3-week duration for this entire module, alright, 9 hours, 3 hours each week. Okay, now it is important for us to pay attention to the duration, because the duration, knowing the duration, then allows us to pace. Alright, how much do we want to cram in? Alright, taking into account who our students are. So pay attention to the duration and don't rush things unnecessarily. Okay? So let's look at the planning. Stage 1 is always to identify your desired results. What do you want to achieve? Alright? So let's say we want the students to realize that adverbs convey intensity. We also want them to realize that because they convey intensity, they enhance reader interest. Alright? So let's say we want to try and convey these two enduring understandings. These are the two things or the two reasons why students should learn about adverbs. Okay? Let's say this is the case. What essential questions can we use? Alright? Usually if we go into a lesson, alright, thinking about teaching adverbs, the question that we would ask would be, what are adverbs? Instead, now that we have established these enduring understandings, you realize that the question, what are adverbs, doesn't really match the enduring understandings that we try to achieve, doesn't really match the goals that the lesson is trying to achieve. Instead, try a question like, why use adverbs? Why can't we just use verbs? Right? And then the next step would be to look at what are the demonstrations, what are the things that we want the students to be able to do for us to know that they have gleaned that understanding. Perhaps you want them to match appropriate verb-adverb pairings, or perhaps you want to enhance sentences with adverbs. Okay? Then we start thinking about the task. Now the task has to match the specific instructional objective, which has to match the essential question, which has to match the enduring understandings. Now you realize that after 3 steps, then you come and think about the product. Not even the activity yet, the product. Okay? So, because the enduring understanding was to show that adverbs show intensity, convey intensity, perhaps we want them to add adverbs to sentences. We want to have a worksheet which makes the students add adverbs to sentences. So for example, a worksheet may have a sentence like, see John run. And then the student may be able to add on like, see John run quickly, or see John run effortlessly. And then after that, you may want to have the child comment. If we say, see John run, what are we trying to say? How do you feel about John? If we say, see John run effortlessly, right, perhaps the child will be able to say, oh, maybe we get an idea that John is physically very fit. Right? So that leads us back to the enduring understandings. But note that we haven't really paid attention to any of the activities yet. Right? We're concentrating on the endpoint goals. Another possible evidence would be at the end of it, right? Maybe after 9 hours, we want them to have a ghost storytelling competition. Okay, arguably, ghost telling competitions use a lot of adverbs, and maybe that is a fun way to engage the students in the learning of adverbs, perhaps. And then finally, we think about the activity. What do we want to do? Do we want to do a think, pair, share? Do we want to do group work? Do we want to do expert groups? Now, really, you realize by now that all these things have become really unimportant. Yeah, they are merely tools in the box to help you get the desired end results. All right. So, to recap, when you plan your curriculum, when you plan your unit, always start with your enduring understandings, why the child needs to learn what you're trying to teach them. And then the questions, how you're going to lead them there. Alright? And then look at the product, then look at the process. Okay? So I hope you found this workshop useful. Alright? Do email me if you need any clarifications. And happy planning.